Shalom again. Welcome to Toward a More Jewish Jesus, where everything gets better when people get together around a more Jewish Jesus. We're a podcast from Interfaithfulness, and at Interfaithfulness, our mission statement is upgrading spirituality and relationships for Jews and Christians. That's what we try to do, upgrade spirituality and relationships for Jews and Christians. And one of the ways we do it is through our podcast. And today, I want to introduce you also to our semi-monthly, that's twice a month, our newsletter, which you can receive. This is called Signals. Signals, we use that name because we are concerned with the intersection of the Christian and Jewish worlds. And at an intersection where there's a lot of traffic, you need traffic signals in order to govern the way people move. And it's our experience and the experience of many people for a long, long time that there are a lot of fender benders and a lot of road rage and a lot of misunderstanding of the signals at the intersection of the Christian and Jewish worlds. And so we write this newsletter and send it to you twice a month. And it's very issue-oriented, dealing with the situations where there might be a collision instead of cooperation at the intersection of the Christian and Jewish worlds. So today, I'm going to report to you on one of our recent editions of Signals, the Interfaithfulness newsletter, because I want you to know the kind of things we deal with. And then at the end of this episode of Toward a More Jewish Jesus, I'm going to remind you to sign up for Signals. It's free of charge. Sign up for it, and it'll come to you by email twice a month, the 1st and the 15th of each month. This one, a recent one, dealt with a very hot question. Here's the question. Do you believe that all Jews will go to hell unless they specifically confess faith in Christ or in the Messiah? Do you believe that all Jews will go to hell unless they specifically confess faith in Yeshua? Now, if you are a Yeshua believer out there, whether you're a Jew or a Gentile, if you ever seek to discuss your faith in Yeshua with a Jewish person, you will be asked this question. Not maybe, but for sure. Now, it's not so much a question as an accusation, but it's a big one, and a lot of people try to avoid the question. I'm not going to avoid the question today. And I want to give you some insights into how you might deal with the question, whether you're a person who has to answer it, or even if you're a person who asks the question. And in every edition of Signals, we have 3 sections. We have like a traffic light, red light, yellow light, green light. The red light is, let's stop and look at the issue. The yellow light is, let's look at the things we have to keep in mind as we proceed. And the green light is some suggestions as how to go. So let's look at the red light issue. Recently, an Israeli believer in Yeshua accused me of being theologically untrustworthy, of being a phony, of being a heretic, because I would not say that a Jew cannot be, quote, saved, the term that he used, that is delivered from the judgment of God in hell. A Jew cannot be rescued from that unless he or she explicitly confesses faith in Jesus. He wanted me to say that a Jew cannot be rescued from eternity, separated from God, unless he specifically confesses faith in Christ. I wouldn't say that. And for some people, like this fellow, unless you unambiguously make a statement about that, you're considered untrustworthy, you're considered to be misguided, dangerous, a phony, a heretic. That was me. Now, again, if you ever have a conversation with a Yeshua believer, you're going to be asked this question. How are you going to handle it? Well, let's look at the yellow light. let's look at some things we need to remember as a caution. First of all, I did not satisfy my Israeli interlocutor with his one-man inquisition. He was not interested in any answer I might give him. I even sent him some pages from a book that I've written called Converging Destinies, Jews, Christians, and the Mission of God. And at the time of this taping, that book is not out yet, but it will be in a few months. I sent him some pages from that. He wasn't interested. He only wanted a yes or no. He wanted me to state this statement that a Jew cannot find a positive eternal destiny unless and until he or she explicitly confesses faith in Christ. And if I wouldn't say that, then I was bad news. But I believe that Job's friends had it right. If you've never read the book of Job, it's pretty heavy sledding. It's great literature. It's 42 chapters, and but in the book of Job, he's a man who has lost his family. His children have all died. His wealth is gone. His health is gone. His life has gone from being a very, very fruitful, righteous, godly life with all kinds of riches, many children, everything wonderful. He's gone from that to the pits. And during this time, 3 friends come to visit him. It's like sitting shiva in Jewish culture, where you come to visit a mourner, and they come to visit him. And these 3 friends all have respectable theological explanations for why he is suffering like this. I mean, they're very well constructed. They're great explanations. And basically they say, look, you must have done something really bad. I mean, really bad. Really, really bad for God to have let you be struck down like this. And if you will just confess all the things you did wrong and return to the straight and narrow, everything will come up roses. And Job says, because that's not the explanation. I didn't do anything to deserve this. And part of the lesson of the book of Job is that when we have our neat, tidy little explanations about how things work spiritually, we need to realize we probably don't know exactly what we're talking about. Because by the end of the book of Job, God comes on the scene and he tells them all, you guys, including Job, you guys just didn't really know what you were talking about, because the truth is bigger than your little tiny little constructs. So I'm going to limit myself today to how I answer this question. Do you believe that a Jewish person must explicitly confess faith in Christ in order to have a positive eternal destiny? I'm going to treat it in 2 ways. I'm going to remind us, first of all, that statements have consequences. They have entailments. And people who speak like my friend in Israel speak, I want them to face up to the fact that what they say has real consequences. Let me give you an example. What I would say to this Israeli guy, and I will be in Israel some months from now, and I hope to meet him. And I would say to him and to his friends, I'd say, look, since 1860, in laying the groundwork and eventually establishing the state of Israel, as far as we know, 24,000 Jews, roughly 24,000, have given their lives for the founding of the state. 24,000. Let's assume that 1/6 of the 24,000, that is 4,000 of those people who gave their lives, were believers in Yeshua. And therefore they go to a positive eternal destiny. By your construct, we have to believe that of theological necessity, the other 20,000 of these Jews, including young friends of yours that you fought in wars with here in Israel, sons and daughters, mamas and papas, uncles and aunts, that the 20,000 of those Jews of theological necessity are all in hell forever and ever. Now, if that's what you believe, then say it loud and say it proud. Because that is what is entailed by your theological construct. Let's make it a little bigger. I know you know where I'm going. I'm going to the Shoah, the Holocaust. In the Holocaust, we Jews lost 6 million of our people. 1.5 million of them were children. Let's assume, for argument's sake, that the children all get a free pass from God. They all go to a positive eternal destiny because, after all, they're only children. That leaves 4.5 million. Out of that 4.5 million, let's assume, for argument's sake, that 500,000, 500,000, were Jews who believed in Yeshua. They also go to a positive eternal destiny. That leaves us 4 million Jews who did not believe in Yeshua. Are you prepared to say, and to say it loud, and to say it proud, that of theological necessity, you must say that all 4 million of those Jews went to eternal perdition? Is that what you believe? If it is, say it loud and say it proud. Of theological necessity, all these people are really in the lake of fire, which is the way people usually think about this. They're going to spend eternity that way. Is that what you believe? Then say it loud and say it proud, because that's what's entailed in the statement you're asking me to repeat. If that's your position, fine. It's not mine. So now that I've talked about these entailments, I would then, and we talked about this in our issue of signals, I would then go to what is my position. And let me read you a little bit. Okay? I believe that the only basis upon which we can guarantee people a share in the world to come is through faith in Yeshua the Messiah. We've been given a franchise of sorts. God has given us a franchise to go out and tell people all the words of this life. That's one of my favorite texts. In the 5th chapter of the book of Acts, the angel tells Peter, who is releasing from prison, go in the temple and proclaim there all the words of this life. That's what I do. I proclaim words of life. We've been given a franchise to proclaim words of life to people, to tell them that they can have a positive eternal destiny by embracing Yeshua the Messiah. We've been given that franchise. But we must remember also what it says in the Torah in Deuteronomy 29:29, one of my favorite texts, which says, the secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things that have been revealed belong to us and to our children, that we may observe all the words of this Torah. There are 2 categories of truth mentioned in that verse, Deuteronomy 29:29. There are the secret things that belong to the Lord our God, and there are the things that have been revealed to us. I would suggest that there are things that are our business, the things that have been revealed to us that we might obey them, and there are things that are God's business, that He alone knows. And we should learn to respect the difference between what God knows and what it's given to us to know. Let me read again. I can only offer people the promise of redemption on the basis of the franchise I have been given. But beyond that, they are in the hands of a holy God, the holy God who gave His only begotten Son to purchase their redemption. What He does with them is between Him and them, and as Shakespeare said, there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy, Horatio. Meanwhile, what should I be doing? I should be carrying on with my franchise, offering people not just an eternal destiny with God, but a richness of life that is available to us through Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah, and the sending forth of the Ruach HaKodesh through Him. So, I'm now editing the pages of a book that is going to be published within a few months of this broadcast. The book is called Converging Destinies: Jews, Christians, and the Mission of God. And in that book, I quote from a famous missiologist. This man was a missionary in India for 40 years. His name is Leslie Newbigin. He came back to England and became a great an analyst of the spiritual malaise of the West, a brilliant scholar. And one of his books, called The Gospel in a Pluralist Society, he says this, which I think you'll find interesting. Quote, "I confess that I am astounded at the arrogance of theologians who seem to think that we are authorized in our capacity as Christians to inform the rest of the world about who is to be vindicated and who is to be condemned at the last judgment. I find this way of thinking among Christians astonishing in view of the emphatic warnings of Jesus against being presumptuous about matters of final destiny. It would be tedious to repeat again the innumerable warnings of Jesus in this matter, his repeated statements that the last day will be a day of surprises, of reversals, of astonishment. In his most developed parable of the Last Judgment, the parable of the sheep and the goats, both the saved and the lost are astonished. Surely theologians at least should know that the judge of the last day is God and no one else. If a theologian is really serious, he must learn to understand the impossible possibility of salvation, that it's really an extraordinary situation that we can hardly understand." He continues, "In St. Paul, we find this same tension of confidence and awareness of the abyss that lies underneath. Paul, who was certain that nothing can separate him from the love of God in Christ Jesus, also tells his friends that he has to exercise severe self-discipline, quote, lest, having preached to others, I myself should be disqualified, end quote. So, in other words, he has consummate confidence, but yet not presumption. The Christian life lived in the magnetic field between these two poles of the amazing grace of God and the appalling sin in which I share has a corresponding synthesis of a godly confidence and a godly fear. In other words, my friends, the sins that you and I ought to be most concerned about are our own, always. In the end, I'm calling for what the book of Job calls for. And I'm now through with Newbig, and I'm giving you my own words. The book of Job calls for a chastened humility in speaking about ultimate things. Meanwhile, let's get busy with our franchise. Throwing stones at each other is a digression we can ill afford to entertain. I remember some years ago, there was a fellow I know. I've known him at least 35 years, who's a very famous Jew who believes in Yeshua. And he was speaking at a conference where he denounced me and what he perceived to be my views on this matter. He was not accurate in his perceptions, but he was speaking of his perceptions, and it was a very scathing presentation he gave. And afterwards, I went up to him and I said, I noticed that every verse you quoted up there, every single one of them, and he quoted, I don't know, about 11 of them, they were all from the Gospel of John. I said, does that make any difference to you? He says, makes no difference. But I would suggest to you, my friends, that the Gospel of John has very, very categorical language, more than the other Gospels. It's very much light and darkness, us, them, life and death. It's polarized language. I would suggest that it's a good idea to try to discover what situation was John writing to? What was going on? What was going on with the people he was writing to that he chooses to write in such categorical language? In other words, to rightly understand what the Gospel of John is saying, we need to understand the context in which it was written. But for my friend, that made no difference. He just threw a fistful of verses at me. I would suggest that when we deal with the very weighty matters that I'm talking about right now, we need to sit down with a certain amount of humility and realize we're dealing with very extraordinary subjects, we need to come and sit together and be prepared to learn something that we didn't know before. And speaking of that, I'll remind you as we close with the fact that the secret things that belong to the Lord our God, that we don't know, that we can't know, that's not given to us to know. And there are the things that have been revealed that belong to us and to our children, that we should observe all the words of God's law. So we need to know the difference. And we need not to throw stones at people who say, I think that's up to God. I don't think that makes somebody a heretic. I hope it makes somebody humble. And with that, I want to close by offering you again some suggestions on how you can get your own copy of Signals. This is what it looks like. Signals. And each edition, twice a month, deals with a different issue or question that confronts us at the intersection of the Christian and Jewish worlds. And what I suggest you do is go to the Interfaithfulness website. Interfaithfulness. Interfaithfulness. Interfaithfulness.org. Go to our website. In the lower right-hand corner, you'll see a box that says, sign me up for Signals. All you do is two things. Number one, you give us your name and your email address. Number two, you will then receive an email at that address asking you to confirm that this is really you. Click on that email, and then automatically, twice a month, you will receive Signals, where we deal with important issues, like the one we just dealt with today. But for now, I've got to go. So do you. So let me remind you, everything gets better when people get together around a more Jewish Jesus. Shalom.
You may support our work at Toward a More Jewish Jesus by sending your tax-deductible contributions to Interfaithfulness PO Box 6137, Altadena, California 91003 6137. That's Interfaithfulness PO Box 6137, Altadena, California 91003-6137. Please make out your checks to Interfaithfulness. If you prefer donating on the web, please visit us at www.interfaithfulness.org and look for the donate button in the lower right corner of the page. We invite you to follow us too at our Interfaithfulness Facebook page. Thanks for joining us today at Interfaithfulness, where everything changes for the better when we move toward a more Jewish Jesus.